So, well, looking at um, wisdom and spiritual understanding, and that text in James 1, verse 5, you it's a text where James say that if we lack wisdom, we need to approach God to ask for wisdom because God is very generous and he will just give us the hips of this wisdom to be able to navigate our way in life as his servants. Well, as we stand at the crossroads of life, if we understand this journey, understanding our need for divine guidance when maps fail and when even paths diverge. So I think one of in defining wisdom, we have to distinguish between the human knowledge and the God perspective as he pushes away of is out to transform our lives. And James play a crucial part in this work of God in us. James has indicated that the generosity of God is something that is incomprehensible. And he has dared to ask us to say, ask from God. And in asking, he said, God will give, you will receive. You will be able to walk in divine understanding. Whether we grapple with personal stuff or communal issues or even generational challenges that are affected by change that God pushes in our lives. He here James wants us to understand that we are living the wisdom of God. And the practical ways that God opened to us or the steps that God give to us in order for us to live in his wisdom is that he is open to listen to us when we ask. He is prepared to open to us when he speak, and he is open to enable us to apply the divine wisdom as we live our everyday life. And one thing that we need to realize in living the wisdom of God in our everyday life is that there is no way that we can live that life by ourselves in our own strength. We live that life, the divine life, displaying the wisdom of God for as long as we are open to be led by his guidance. Well, earlier we mentioned that this wisdom is really when we have to seek ways and reach the wisdom of God, continuing to chase this wisdom of God when maybe paths or we have lost our paths or things are not very clear on the horizon as we move forward. Maybe this illustration captures the essence of the talk and the place that James wants us to understand. Imagine standing at a crossroad at dusk, map in hand, but you don't have a compass. You can study the terrain, you can debate the options, even pick the most popular route, and still end up lost. And this is the human condition without divine wisdom. We have access to more information than ever before, yet confusion persists. So as we continue on this third day of our transformation week, we invite different postures. We invite not to try harder as such, but maybe to understand and look at things quite differently. And James 1:5 opens that door for us. It's an invitation to ask God to give us wisdom. And God has indicated that this wisdom is given freely without shame. He does not scold over our ignorance. He supplies the insight. So what is this wisdom, friends? What is this spiritual understanding that we are talking about? I have really summarized this wisdom so that at least you get grips on what it means, and also spiritual understanding, and want to look at what they mean together. Wisdom is the gift of God that enable us to see beyond the appearances. It guides our choices and it aligns us with the will of God. It enables us to discern the heart beneath the surface. Those things that goes on in deep places of our lives. It aligns the decisions that we make with the purposes of God. And it transforms knowledge into action. And spiritual understanding is the spirit illumination that assists us to discern meaning, purpose, and direction in the midst of life complexities. Spiritual understanding reveals the purpose in confusion. It provides direction in complexity. It illuminates the path that we have to be traveling on going forward. So when we look at wisdom and spiritual understanding, together they move us from confusion to clarity, from stumbling to walking in light. Too often we treat wisdom like a trophy of knowledge to collect. But God's knowledge is quite different. It's the spirit way of seeing the choices that we make in life. It heals, restore, and deal with relationships. And it helps to reorient the priorities that we have in life. So I think if we capture this, we see how wisdom and spiritual understanding move us forward in our journey of faith, and just opens us up to ensure that the decisions, the challenges, the discernment that we have are things that are in line with the will of God for our lives and for the directions that we take. The promise of James in James 1:5 is that God's generosity, and his generosity is an invitation to us to ask from him, to receive from him, and to walk in divine understanding. I like how James emphasized this lack of wisdom. And he actually asked this question: do you feel that you lack wisdom? Do you feel that your life is devoid of the kingdom wisdom? And maybe what he wants us to understand is that this is a particular brand of wisdom. It's not wisdom as it is defined by the world. It is wisdom as defined by the kingdom. And so we know, and James help us to understand that if we ask, God's generous and God will pour this wisdom into our lives. See, this invitation is an open door for any one of us to ask God to give wisdom. And James says that God will give this wisdom freely, without shame. He is not surprised or excuse me, or will not talk scold us when we display our ignorance. James argues that it is God who supplies the insight. So he talk about a God who is generous in shaping us to become people that he wants us to be. His generosity is that he pours out. There is no limit to what he gives when we ask. And maybe the condition for us, what we need to know is that we need to be able to ask. Transformation begins when we humble ourselves before God and ask for divine guidance. The posture of asking opens the door for us to receive. And when we ask, God responds. He does not look down on our ignorance. He supplies the insight. He gives. There is no shame, no reproach, only generosity. So when we contrast this with the human wisdom is limited. And often it is self-serving. But God's wisdom is very different. It is pure, peaceable, merciful, and very fruitful. When we ask for wisdom, we are asking God to give us his vintage point so that what we know becomes what we live. And this wisdom has to translate in our lives into what we know, because then what we know enable us to live to this standard that has been set before us, so that we know and we live that kind of life. Well, friends, we need to be open to this, open to be transformed through the transformation of our thoughts and how we are able to assimilate the thoughts of God and the wisdom of God to direct our lives. Because the divine perspective is able to change everything in us, personally, communally, and generationally. Well, let us look at these three dimensions of transformation. Personal transformation. Wisdom reshapes how we see trials and challenges in our lives. When we are kingdom wise and we go through trials, we don't see them as obstacles, but we see the trials and the challenges as opportunities for growth. Spiritual understanding is the light that enable to turn trials into training grounds, confusion into clarity, and the fear into faithful steps. And what I said earlier becomes real here, because what we know becomes what we live. You know, when we understand the promises of God, that God will be with us always, that He will, whatever challenges that we are going through life, we are not going by ourselves, that God is with us. He gives that as an anchor that we need to be holding in our lives always. And the more His wisdom increases in our lives, we become more and more wiser in kingdom values, in kingdom direction. We can face the trials and the challenges of life knowing that God is with us. We are not by ourselves. And when we have this knowledge in the trials that we go through in life, I think it changes the way we look at things, the way we understand, and the way we walk in that space. That the trials, the challenges are not going to make us fearful, because what we know is that we have God with us. We have God on our side. He walks with us. He protects us. He has created a wall or even a hedge in which we are protected. So, personally, that transformation enable us to move from a place of fear to a place of faith, so that we approach anything that might come our way as a threat. We approach that in faith, because we know that God is with us. And maybe when we look at community transformation, the spiritual understanding, the community transformation, the spiritual understanding builds unity, because we begin to value others as through the eyes of God. And it is not only that it has the generational transformation. So as we pass on wisdom, we ensure that our children and the young people inherit not just the knowledge, but they inherit the living faith. Maybe a vivid metaphor that we could use here is that wisdom is like a compass when in the wilderness. Without it, we can wander. But with it, we find the directions, even when the path is rough. Maybe a practical example, something that can be very helpful here, is that wisdom, as we have mentioned, like a compass, it helps us to steer and enable us to sit on the right path and walk on the right path always, even when that path is rough. How do we live this wisdom? We ask God daily. We begin each day with a prayer. Lord, grant me and spiritual understanding today. We listen actively, because wisdom comes through the time that we spend in the Word. Scripture meditation, quiet time in prayers, and the counsel of spirit-filled believers. Because they enable us to see and to understand things. And as we also seek to apply these courageously in our lives, transformation requires us acting on the wisdom that we have received. Even when we are challenged in our comfort zones. So friends, on this sad day, as we build up to this weekend, we invite you that we need to approach God, we need to approach Him in the throne of grace, asking for wisdom. Because that is living the transformed lives that reflects a God understanding in every decision that we make. So that we are able to apply that even in every relationships that we have, in every challenge that we face. We seek God's leading, God who is able to give generously, God who is able to fill you with His wisdom and spiritual understanding, so that your life will become a testimony of His transforming power. I pray that this transformed life will be a life of reality for you. May God bless you abundantly, friends. Amen.